Sometimes you get really close to the basket, but have annoying obstacles in your way that make it impossible to simply point and shoot like you learned in my last throwing video. In this video, we're going to explore 5 ways to navigate obstacles and save strokes on your scorecard. First off, we need to understand that there are 3 different types of collision in Disc Golf Valley. The first type is solid collision. This is when an object simply stops a disc dead in its tracks. You see this type of collision on fences, rocks, trees, and building, amongst other obvious places like the ground. The second type of collision is foliage collision. This is primarily found on trees and bushes. Each foliage collision hit will slow your disc down by 15%. Sometimes we're using that to our advantage, like on Ahia Enso 6. However, not all foliage is built the same. Some of it, like on Maple Hill, has a ton of collision points built in to the point where trying to account for them all is pointless. The image you see of a bush or tree is built separately from the collision points being added in. That's why the third type of collision that exists is no collision. These are helpful areas to learn where they are in the course so you can throw through those trees or bushes without having to make any adjustments. Now that we know what types of collision objects can have, we can explore 6 ways to navigate those obstacles and save you some strokes. 1. Throw around it. The most straightforward and intuitive method is to throw around the object that's in your way. When you're close to the basket, this is most simplified by your disc selection. If your main throw-in disc is something understable, like a spike or a fuse, you'll want to complement it with a heavily overstable disc with similar lift and drag. Check out the disc stats page on the Global Disc Golf website to learn more about these stats. The similar lift and drag will allow you to use the same power lines for your pullback, but rely on the fade of the disc to get around the obstacle and find the chains. If the path to the basket requires a forehand flight, you need to add 30 feet of power to get the disc there. Unfortunately, there's no magical trick to exactly how far off to the side to aim to get the fade just right into the basket. The best way to learn how to make that judgment is to play a few rounds with your overstable throwing disc as your only throwing disc and let some muscle memory take over. The second method is to throw over the object. Another way of throwing around an object is to throw over it. There are some cases where you have a barrier between you and the basket, which simply doesn't allow you to use your normal aim point. Fortunately, this method does have a math-based solution. Move your aim point up such that the bottom chevron is in line with the distance marker above the basket. Then, adjust your power by subtracting 40 feet off your pullback. 80% of the time, this works every time. But for real, it might not be 40 feet with your particular throwing disc, and that distance is going to change as you get further away from the basket. But at least have some math to work with, and you can find something consistent with this aim point depending on what your disc is. 3. Phase through the object. The solid objects you're encountering are actually two-dimensional in practice. If your disc is even slightly poking through one of these solid objects when you throw, you can actually completely ignore that it's there. You'll usually need to force this to happen by moving the slider or adjusting your aim into the point where some of your disc disappears into the object. This can get you through rocks, houses, fences, and more. When you're lining up these shots, try to rotate your screen far enough that you can see that your disc will have a clear path to the basket after going through that first collision. If you can get the camera inside of the object and can see a clear path to the basket, you'll know you're clear to shoot. It can still be tricky to line up that shot using just the distance marker over the basket instead of the basket itself. There are some areas where there will be a secondary object behind the one you're throwing through. If you don't check for a clear path, you're gonna have a bad time. You can even use this when you're putting. If you get close enough to an object like a wall on Maple Hill 10, You can putt straight at the basket because you're still holding the disc when it enters the wall. You can go straight through it and avoid the collision altogether. 4. Power up. Now that you're armed with the knowledge that hitting a collision point in foliage takes 15% of the velocity off your disc, checking out the game code also tells us that a small random amount of force is applied in some direction. Since we can't possibly account for the random factor, we're going to ignore it. Knowing that hitting collision takes a set amount of velocity off of your disc, you can also make the adjustment to simply throw straight through the tree or bush that's in your way. As you get further out, you need to make bigger adjustments, and the random factor makes it tougher to save. But within 100 feet, you can aim as usual and add about 80 feet of power if you're in a tree or a bush. If the bush is closer to the basket, you may not need to make any adjustments at all. This method is not going to be 100% specifically because of the random factor applied to your disc, but it's good enough to save a lot of the opportunities that you have. 5. Rotate the world.
What do you do when no matter how far left or right you go, you are still behind the rock?
If you get stuck behind an object you can't throw through, another commonly used tactic is to rotate the world. Slide all the way to the left or right and move your aim until the basket comes into view. Then, you can slowly pull back your disc to the side and putt straight to the basket as usual. It's easy to accidentally aim up or down when you're rotating, so make sure you're watching very carefully to keep your aim level and point at the chains. This can avoid objects in your way. They can also help you pull your disc out of a collision zone before you throw the putt. There are a few things to keep in mind when you're using rotate the world method. Rotate it all the way to one side actually brings you about 15 feet closer to the basket. So you're just out of your typical putting range at about 60 feet. You can still rotate all the way to one side and be able to putt comfortably from about 45 feet. You can use this to your advantage as well to manage long distance putts to get out from behind obstacles. If you're angled up at an extreme angle, the disc will fall off towards the edge of the screen after you make the release. So make sure you adjust where you want to throw for your putt to account for that fade. Remember how the disc doesn't have collision while you're still holding it? Be careful about rotating too close to the basket and sending your disc clean through to the other side without hitting any chains. 6. Bounce under. When you're trying to save a shot, this is one of the more extreme options, since a miss can send your disc soaring the wrong way. You can aim down at the ground and send your skip disc full power to bounce off the ground and up into the basket. This technique utilizes the way that the disc has a few milliseconds after release before it can collide with anything. The colliders aren't usually on the lowest parts of trees or bushes, so when you aim down, you escape the colliders quickly. When your disc starts to come back up, it has traveled far enough to be clear of collision altogether. For me, this technique is best used in a last ditch effort or to escape bushes on the fairway, like on Downtown 4. But it certainly has a use case for making it into the basket as well. Mastering these 6 techniques can turn frustrated obstacles into highlight reel throw ins. Keep practicing, get creative, and you'll be saving strokes like a pro in no time.